recall what kinds of consequences there were for them.
Oh,
But certainly that was the value of the camera, because the world got to see what is happening.
what can happen, yeah.
What they didn't get, I think, is an explanation in part, because most of law enforcement, whether it's men or women, are kind of macho. They don't want to talk about fear, and that they were scared to death and lost it. They went crazy on the street and beat the fellow mercilessly.
Yeah,
And if while you're beating this fellow mercilessly your gun goes off, then it's a potential
It's
killing.
very serious, yeah.
It's a very serious thing, but generally speaking, the use of force is restrained by the desire not to get yourself in trouble. And certainly the cameras now exert some control, because some of the things I've seen on the internet of police officers misbehaving. One of the other officers will jump in and grab them, or
try to take him aside.
or try to block the camera, one or the other. But the goal is to have an impact with the camera, and it's having an impact. But
Well, how about police body cams? Is that a good idea? Would that protect the police?
the police think it's a great idea, as long as they control it.
As long as they control it?
And obviously, that's a matter that the legislature's gonna have to decide. They've already decided it in Minnesota, and they've authorized funding for body cameras. The ACLU has a position on how much privacy the citizens have versus how much control the police have of the video, and when the police get to see the video. Do they get to see it before they write their report, to review their story, if you will, or do they just have no access to the camera?
Well, and do they have any control over the camera in the situation itself? Let me tell you a little story. A young black woman, and you know her, was called to the door because of a noise complaint. And so she's talking to the officer, and the officer is trying to come in, and she's telling him, no, this is my house, you can't come in. You know, we can talk right here, and I'd be happy to do that, but I don't want you just walking in without, you know, just cause or a warrant. So, and he was arguing, and he was being kind of a little harsh with her. So all of a sudden he said, wait a minute. He turned around and was touching something in his pocket, and then he turned back and said, let's just start over. And she said, I know he had a tape recorder, and I know that he rewound it, or marked it somehow so that he could start at the point where he wanted the story to start.
And what's the
So the
question?
point, yes, the point I'm trying to make is, if they were all wearing cameras, could they manipulate the cameras as the situation progressed in order to tell the story the way they wanted to tell it?
Well, simple answer is probably yes. Is it going to be continued as part of law that they have total control over when the camera's on and off? Probably, just because they have political power in the legislature. Some very powerful people in the legislature happen to be either active or former county sheriffs. And should they be able to, is a debatable question that the legislature does get to decide and has already made a decision on. The answer so far is yes, they get to manipulate the camera. They can turn it on and off whenever they want. Can they erase this stuff? I don't think that they are able to erase what's on the camera. Much like you're not able to erase what's on your computer. You know, it's certainly someplace out there in the cloud.
Well,
Can we get to it? Probably not.
And if you've got two officers and one shuts his camera off at some point or erases something, the other one is will not have done that. It will be obvious. So, but you know, if they can turn the camera off before anything escalates, then what is the point of having a camera?
Well, from my point of view, if I were a police officer today, I would be going to work every day with the idea in mind that I could make a mistake, and I also could be the victim of a false complaint. He called me the N-word, he called me the C-word, whatever kind of complaint. And it's not a big complaint, but I'd be plenty happy to have the camera on all the time and protect me from any accusation that I could have done that. Because I'm not trying to hide the fact that I make mistakes. They knew that when they hired me, that they didn't hire the perfect person. They hired a young kid that was willing to risk his life.
Right.
And was willing to make mistakes and hopefully learn by those mistakes. So I don't think we're gonna solve all problems in policing with the camera, but I think basically once the legislature and the courts get done with the camera issue, they will turn out to be a plus for both sides, the public and the police.
Well, I know that dash cameras have turned out to be a plus for both sides, so.
Let me just
Yes.
add one more thing. What the legislature does is the state law, and that will be very general. Cities do different things, and they, meaning the chief or the city council, can have their own policies, and they can be more restrictive of the police officer's utilization of the camera. They can't be any looser because the state will have a mandate in their law,
Right.
but they can be more restrictive and say, you know, you're gonna have your camera on 100% of the time, and you're not gonna see it before you write reports, and anything else that they want to do.
Okay,
You know,
interesting.
that's the city government, chief of police or county sheriff's power.
That's interesting, I had not thought of that. Now let's talk about militarization of the police in terms of, well, you talked about a lot of vets going into the police force, so they've already got a military background, and then they feel as if they're just carrying that forward, and perhaps they are. And I also want to talk about police taking on military equipment, surveillance equipment, tanks and armored cars. Tanks is not the word I want, but armored vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that? Do you think that's a good trend or not?
Overall, not, would be the simple answer. There are a lot of variables in that whole thing. If you go back to my perception of American policing, that first we killed the natives that had this land, and we needed, you know, troops to do that.
Right.
Many of those troops then became the county sheriff or the marshal, Wyatt Earp, or whatever you want to call them. The slave issue comes into play because part of the Second Amendment and part of American policing is based on the old slave patrols. And the well-regulated militia wasn't just necessary to protect the people from the federal government. A well-regulated militia was necessary to keep the slaves in their state and to protect slavery from the federal government. So that whole thing is a kind of a mixed bag.
I've never ever heard that explanation before, but it's very good. Well, yeah.
Well, there's a lot written about it, and interestingly enough, one of the books that I read where I got that perspective on history is well footnoted, and when you follow the footnotes, you can actually find the microfiche copies of the newspapers where they were advertising for people and offering the rewards to the militia.
Interesting. Do you remember the name of that book?
I remember the name of the author,
Well, that's all right.
Gerald Horne.
Gerald Horne, okay.
His PhD, and it was something like the slave revolts of 1776 or something like that. I might even have it in the materials that I gave you, but if you looked on Amazon.com,
Gerald Horne.
Gerald Horne, H-O-R-N-E,
Okay.
that would be the most current book that he's written. He's written several books, and the thing I liked about them was that they were footnoted, and because I'm retired, sit at the computer, follow the trail,
Yeah,
and actually see if the footnote gets to what it said it did, and it did. So
cool.
there's a lot of history out there that has been retained.
Cool, that's very good to know. You're such a holistic thinker, Herb. I mean, you don't take anything for granted. You pursue it until you've gotten the best information you can
Okay,
get.
I'll come back next time too.
Okay, good. That's actually the end of my little list, but I know you have a couple of things that you want to talk about. Shall we talk about, this is militarized police forces, 11 shocking facts. If you don't mind, I'd like to just kind of go through them on a sentence apiece basis here. The first problem with the militarization of American police forces is that it can harm and sometimes kill innocent people when there's sophisticated militaristic weaponry involved. You want to jump in on that?
I'll make a general comment again about the whole idea of military policing. And it's related to the slave revolt's origins and the Second Amendment's militia motivation. The police aren't hired and paid well and pensioned just to provide services to the general population.
To protect and serve?
They are paid well and pensioned well and protected by the elites in America. I mean, we're basically the public security guards for those who have much.
Okay.
And we're dealing, the police, are dealing with the public. And the public and the elites are not always on the same page. The elites, as far as I understand it, would allow discrimination and racism and different schools, etc., to go on forever if black people didn't raise hell.
Right.
So that the idea that the police are militarized just by accident, they're militarized because we are becoming such an unequal society that the elites are feeling threatened.
Okay.
They're feeling threatened to the point where they're hiring more police, they're giving them more equipment, they're letting them, in my opinion, get away with more, in part because they know that in a society where the difference between the rich and the poor is as dramatic as it is eventually going to drive the poor to some sort of level of rebellion. Maybe not full-scale civil war, maybe not revolt, but certainly there's going to be problems. And I say that not based on my own opinion, but based on statements made by very wealthy people speaking to other very wealthy people at conferences about why they should be in favor of increased taxation and increased government expenditures to serve the needs of the poor and provide good education. And they're basically, the one fellow that I observed, I can't remember his name, but he said, it's either pay taxes or it's pitchforks. And the people who pay the taxes are not the people that are making 100 grand or 50 grand or 40 grand. The people that pay 47% of the taxes are the people that are way over 250,000.
Okay.
So those are the elites.
Is it one of these, sir?
That's the book, yes, The Counter-Revolution.
Oh,
I'll
okay.
get out of the way of the camera.
Our producer has just given us the Counter-Revolution of 1776, slave resistance and the origins of something. But anyway, you can find it from that. The name is Gerald Horne, Horne, if you're interested in looking at that, taking a look at the book.
Anyway, that's my general statement about,
Okay.
about the militarization of the police.
See,
There are people that are fighting.
Yeah. Well, it was presented to me as the military have so much money that they end up over-equipping themselves. And then this is sort of the leftover equipment that filters down to the police. But apparently there's much more intent behind it than that. Although that itself would be bad enough.
But, no, I think that that's a realistic part of it. But part of the reason that we are as militaristic as we are is not because the poor people of America are demanding that we are militaristic. It's because the elites want to be able to control the economy or the resources of other countries.
Well, do you think that the war on terror is fueling any of this militarization of the police? Or do you think it's making people hyper-aware and sort of skittish and on edge? And so a militarized police force looks like a good thing?
I remember the name of the author and the title of the book
Okay.
in answer to that question. The war on terror is a war on blowback. Blowback is the title of the book by Chalmers Johnson.
Chalmers Johnson.
And basically, we created the blowback
Okay.
through our actions invading other people's countries, taking control of their resources or trying to take control of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they are doing what we would do if, just say, the Canadians came here and tried taking over Little Falls. We'd be guerrillas.
Right.
You know, I mean, we'd fight back.
So you think that we essentially created the terrorist cells, ISIS and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and all of the other
Or we set up the conditions, certainly.
that almost mandated that they come into existence. I think you're right. Some people say that militarization is a boon to contractors. The military-industrial complex, it's like, oh, here's a whole nother consumership for the stuff that we make. I don't know if that even needs a reply.
I don't think so. That seems obvious to me.
Border militarization is a part of police militarization, that we have a sense that the borders need to be patrolled and controlled, and because of that, we need assault rifles and grenades and everything. Do you think that that's part of it?
Well, yes.
I mean,
Obviously, it's part of it.
We're pretty distant from borders here, unless you want to talk about Canada, but we haven't had much trouble there.
We're not very distant from borders because there are plenty of illegals in Minnesota working in the meatpacking industry, and many of them will be doing harvesting. So we're not that far away. I mean, it's a very long one-day drive from the border
Yeah,
to here,
that's
but the reality is that it can be done in a day.
Yeah, and it may be safer to be here if you're an illegal immigrant than to be in Arizona or Texas, or because we don't have the same kind of vigilance about it.
Herb, I want to ask you a question about law enforcement officers, in that I was married to a law enforcement officer for almost 20 years. I'm curious as to why so many law enforcement officers lean conservatively or are right-wing in their views when the National Rifle Association allows and is pro bulletproof vest piercing ammunition. It seems counterproductive for a law enforcement officer to be behind an organization or in support of an organization or even members of an organization that really advocates strongly to allow those body-piercing, bulletproof vest-piercing bullets. I've always been baffled by that.
Well, I'm not sure that I can clear anything up other than to say that most of the people who own firearms in Minnesota and pay dues to the NRA are solid citizens that do absolutely zero harm. I would guess that the level of felony convictions for NRA members in Minnesota is less than 1/10 of 1%. The people who are committing firearms crimes aren't members of the NRA, and they don't give two hoots about constitutional rights or gun laws.
But why does the NRA support
Yes.
allowing those kind of bullets that could kill you or my ex-husband or any other officer at any time? Why would they want to give license to that? I don't get that.
Most of the chiefs of police and sheriffs do not. I mean, there certainly are plenty of police officers that are what I would call the right-wing Republican nut jobs who believe there should be absolutely zero regulation of anything to do with firearms. But the Chiefs of Police Association, the National Sheriff's Association, they aren't in favor of that. They testify against it. And the reason politicians do it is something you're gonna have to ask politicians. But I don't think that the general statement, the police or law enforcement support the use of hollow point bullets or body armor piercing ammunition. I don't think most of the police do. A very vocal, small percentage of the right wingers do.
So this is really just about making sure that no kind of weaponry and firearm weaponry and no kinds of ammunition are off the table.
Right, the NRA is a lobbying group for the arms industry, and many people are duped into supporting it, but they have enough money to have a tremendous impact on many politicians. And if you were a politician running, just say in Todd County, and somebody was willing to give you $10,000 as long as you maintain total access to firearms, $10,000 go a long way in a local legislative race.
Yeah.
You know, they wouldn't have to give it to you in one $10,000 check. They could just get $20 or $100 from all the members of the NRA in the county. Pretty powerful group.
Yeah, it is a very powerful group. How are we doing for time? Does anybody know?
About 15 minutes left.
Okay, good. Did you see this article, Herb? This is the Morrison County Record of the week of July 17th, or the Sunday of July 17th, talking about the Dallas shooting and how it has affected local police officers and